starting pre-summit talks at the truce village that straddles the inter-Korean border. They plan to finalise the exact date for the summit as well as the agenda items. South Korea's first ever stealth fighter jet makes its public debut at a sensitive time. It's the first of 40 F-35As that were purchased 4 years ago. Plus, after 3 months of talks, South Korea and the US have officially reached an agreement in principle on the terms of amending their FTA. So today is another huge day of diplomacy on the Korean peninsula. High-level delegations from South and North Korea are meeting at the border village of Panmunjom right now to hammer out the details of their highly anticipated leaders' summit slated for late April. Let's go live to our Oh Jung-hee, who's standing by at the Office for Inter-Korean Dialogue. Jung-hee.
Good morning, Mark. High-level delegations from Seoul and Pyongyang have just now made their way into the conference center. The talks, the second high-level talks, in fact, have started just now. For your information, the first talks were held back in January. Today's talks are taking place at Tongil-gak, a building located at the North Korean side of the truce village of Panmunjom. Seoul's delegation left the office for the Inter-Korean dialogue at 7:30 a.m. this morning. They left a brief remark to the press. Take a listen.
We will do our best in our discussions with the North today to successfully hold inter-Korean summit talks scheduled for the late April. Thank you.
The delegation said that the date of the summit will be set for certain through today's meeting. They added they'll continue to focus on denuclearization in future discussions, stressing that it's been the most important agenda since the January 9th high-level talks and the several comings and goings over the past 3 months. The delegations are made up of 3 officials from each side. The South Korean delegation is led by Unification Minister Cho Myung-kyun, and the North Korean side is led by Lee Sun-kwon, chairman of the North's Committee for Peaceful Reunification. The two headed their delegations during previous high-level talks back in January.
So, Jung-hee, what can we expect from this latest round of talks? There must be a number of things both sides are looking to discuss today.
That's right. As I mentioned, the main objective of today's talks is to set the agenda and the date for the Inter-Korean summit slated for next month. And South Korea's Summit Preparation Committee has 3 big tasks for now. That's denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula, setting an everlasting peace on the Korean Peninsula with lower tensions, and finally improving inter-Korean relations. So we're expecting Seoul and Pyongyang could exchange opinions on these 3 things, and plus maybe establishing a direct communication channel between the leaders of South and North Koreas. But especially as today's talks come hot on the heels of Chinese President Xi Jinping and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's meeting in Beijing, we could hear more from the North about that as well. Kim reportedly told Xi that denuclearization has always been his ancestors' teaching and is therefore the regime's goal. So we could hear some specific steps that the regime is going to take on its path to abandon its nuclear weapons. Also, just as the unification minister said before leaving, the date for the summit is expected to be determined. As for now, the 26th or 27th of April are considered as the most likely dates of the summit. The location of the summit has already been determined as the Peace House that's located on the South Korean side of the border village of Panmunjom. Back to you, Mark.
Well, thank you very much for that report, Jung-hee, and do keep us updated if we get some updates from Panmunjom. Now, also heading north of the border are a team of technicians. They are going to be setting up the performance stage for 2 concerts to be held in North Korea early next month. The group of 70 will fly to Pyongyang in around half an hour's time. Another 120 South Koreans made up of the music performance and taekwondo demonstration teams, reporters and government support staff will head to the north on Saturday. Chinese State Councilor Yang Jiechi will visit Seoul today to brief South Korean officials on the outcome of the summit talks between Beijing and Pyongyang. Yang, a member of the Political Bureau of the Central Committee of China's Communist Party, is visiting as a special envoy of Chinese President Xi Jinping and is expected to meet with President Moon's National Security Advisor Jong Eui-yong this afternoon. He will pay a visit to President Moon on Friday. Along with the details of the recent bilateral talks between President Xi and Kim Jong-un, Yang will also discuss the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and various other issues. The United States has signalled that it's feeling rather positive but remaining realistic about the direction North Korea is taking as the two sides prepare for their highly anticipated summit. Lee Seung-jae reports.
With the U.S.-North Korea summit set for sometime in May, the White House continues to observe North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's every move. This includes Kim's recent trip to Beijing for a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. In a press briefing Wednesday, White House spokesperson Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that while the recent news on North Korea appears positive, the U.S. remains cautious.
We're going to be cautiously optimistic, but we feel like things are moving in the right direction, and that the meeting yesterday was a good indication that the maximum pressure campaign has been working. You saw him leave for the first time since becoming the leader of North Korea, leaving his country for the first time for that meeting, and we consider that to be a positive sign that the maximum pressure campaign is continuing to work, and we're going to continue moving forward in this process in hopes for a meeting down the road.
This comes as President Trump responded to the North Korean leader's recent trip to Beijing by tweeting that he and Kim look forward to meeting each other. He added that he believes there was a good chance the North Korean leader will do what is right for his people and for humanity and move towards denuclearization. Meanwhile, North Korea expert Victor Cha says that by going to Beijing, the North Korean leader might be saving face and giving the appearance of policy coordination in advance of the coming summits with the leaders of South Korea and the U.S. Cha added that Kim may be looking to use China as insurance in case his summit with President Trump does not go well. With the world focused on what's to come in the coming months, there's a mixture of optimism but also trepidation, with North Korea known for its unexpected moves and decisions. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And fresh movements captured in a sensitive place at a sensitive time amid the ongoing diplomacy push with North Korea. Satellite imagery taken last month suggests North Korea may have started testing an experimental light water reactor and possibly brought another reactor online at its Yongbyon Nuclear Research Center. Both can be used to produce the fissile materials needed for nuclear bombs. And according to a recent analysis in Jane's Intelligence Review, a monthly journal on global security issues, a testing program is underway at the reactor, meaning it could become operational with little warning later this year or next year. South Korea's first F-35A stealth fighter jet has made its official debut at a sensitive time as well for diplomacy with North Korea. South Korea's Vice Defense Minister Seo Ju-sok led Seoul's delegation on Wednesday at a joint rollout ceremony for the jet at Lockheed Martin's assembly line in Fort Worth, Texas. The jet is the first of 40 F-35As South Korea agreed to buy under a 2014 deal. It's also the nation's first warplane with the capability of evading radar detection. All 40 will be deployed to South Korea by 2021. So after 3 months of talks, South Korea and the US have officially reached an agreement in principle on the terms of amending their FTA. We have our business correspondent Kim Hae-sung in the studio with us to discuss this matter. So Hae-sung, it seems both sides are pretty happy with the amount of concessions they were able to squeeze out of the other side.
Yes, Seoul's Trade Minister Kim Jong-un and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer released a joint statement Wednesday night local time saying the two countries were pleased to announce that the amendment, which addresses issues on investment, tariffs, and trade remedies. This was somewhat expected given that Trade Minister Kim announced last weekend at Incheon International Airport that the two sides had reached an agreement after weeks of back and forth flights to Washington for formal and informal talks. The White House also said on Tuesday local time that the two sides had reached an agreement in principle. What is surprising, however, Mark, is the speed of the trade negotiations. The U.S. signaled its willingness to possibly amend the deal last summer, but Seoul and Washington formally started the talks in January and came to a deal after just 3 months. Look at NAFTA negotiations. It began last August, but the U.S., Canada, and Mexico have yet to come up with a tentative agreement on their 24-year-old deal after 6 rounds of talks.
Yeah, but we could, of course, argue that the NAFTA deal is a lot more complex and has been established for a long time as well. And there are 3 parties involved there rather than just the 2. But there's no denying this was a very speedy process. Why do you think it was all sorted out so quickly?
Well, there's a combination of factors. President Trump had pledged to amend or scrap the deal during his election campaign, criticizing it as a horrible deal, pointing out America's trade deficit with South Korea. So he wanted to wrap up the amendment soon to show his supporters before the midterm elections in November. South Korea also wants to lower uncertainty with regards to trade with the U.S., its second largest trading partner, and steel and aluminum tariff measures, as South Korea is the 3rd largest steel exporter to the U.S. In addition, the ongoing North Korea issue means closer cooperation from Seoul and Washington is needed, so the two wanted to wrap up the amendment soon. In the joint statement, it actually said, quote, "This represents important progress in improving Korea-U.S. trade and economic relations based on their strong and enduring security relationship." And at the end of the day, both are somewhat satisfied with the deal, calling it a win-win for both sides.
Yeah, so everyone seems pretty happy with the changes, including President Trump, who's quite a difficult man to please in the first place. But just walk us through some of the specific amendments.
Yes, amendments to the KORUS FTA include areas like investment, tariffs, trade in automobiles, and trade remedies. Seoul has agreed to lift some of its safety and environmental regulations and allow U.S. automakers to ship to Korea up to 50,000 vehicles each, up from 25,000 previously. Tariffs imposed on Korean pickup trucks exported to the U.S. will be extended by 20 years to 2041. South Korea, on the other hand, secured revisions to the investor-state dispute settlement clause and other areas it has demanded since start of the trade talks, like agriculture. There will be no further opening of South Korea's agricultural sector or mandatory use of U.S. auto parts, which Trade Minister Kim said was a red line Seoul would defend. Along with the FTA amendment is an agreement on exempting South Korea from the Trump administration's 25% steel tariff measures. In exchange, South Korea's quota will be set at 2.68 million tons of steel exports a year, or 70% of its average annual shipments to the U.S. between 2015 to 2017. The arrangement with respect to steel products is expected to take effect on May 1st. Working-level officials are ironing out the details so that Seoul and Washington can finalize their amendments to the 6-year-old trade deal soon, which are subject to domestic procedures in both countries before provisions can be brought into force.
Okay, sounds wonderful. Haesung, thank you ever so much for clearing up what is quite a complex agreement, and we appreciate you coming into the studio for us.
My pleasure.
Now, we are going to stick with economic news because South Korea's business sentiment among manufacturers dipped for the 4th month in a row. March, mainly due to a slump in the automobile and shipbuilding sectors. Data by the Bank of Korea released on Thursday shows this business sentiment index for the manufacturing sector dropped 1 point from the previous month to 74 in March, the lowest level in 2 years and 3 months. A reading below 100 means there are more pessimists than optimists on the local economy. The central bank attributes the drop to growing concerns over a global trade war sparked by US trade protectionist measures. Negotiations are underway to amend South Korea's constitution to better reflect the social and economic changes, as well as to put the country on course towards becoming a more modern democracy. Something long overdue. The last revision is from 3 decades back. Our Kim Min-ji sat down with the president of the Initiative and Referendum Institute Europe, who's been at the very forefront of promoting direct democracy.
South Korea took the road to democracy some 30 years ago, ending an era of military dictatorship. And last year, the country took that democracy to another level through the candlelight protest that led to the ousting of a president, thanks to their peaceful nature.
Making participatory democracy a formal part of the making of the politics here is very important, because we come all from more, let's say, autocratic traditions. Sometimes you need really to go on the streets to make your voice heard, but in a normal situation, of course, it would be better to be able to use the ballot box, to use your formal rights.
The main reason that sparked the candlelight protest was a deep underlying factor in Korean society. Now that is, Korea faces the problem of ridding the political system of corruption. We see shady deals between politicians, high-ranking officials, and the family-controlled conglomerates. In that aspect, how do you see Korea putting an end to the rampant corruption that's embedded in Korean culture?
To have a system where many things are done beyond or behind closed doors. So transparency is important, but of course division and separation of powers is also very important, that not just all the power lies in the hand of one person or one office. So more decentralization, more direct democracy, more proportionality are ways to go.
In that sense, efforts are in the works to amend the country's constitution, seeking to dilute the concentration of power and introduce more features of modern democracy.
I think that's very important, and thirdly, also, of course, that the people have the rights to question things more openly, and giving a minority the possibility to offer an issue to the people and to the nation, and then to discuss it and finally to decide on it. I think it's a very important step towards a more mature democracy in Korea. And on the other side, the recall is, of course, a check on elected people. So it's not possible just to see an election as a free way of doing whatever an elected person wants. So I think these check and balances are very important for making democracy a little bit more democratic here.
But to get it to the next level of full democracy, hurdles must be overcome.
Those in power normally are a little bit skeptical about sharing power with others, and those in opposition are very skeptical about those in power, and that's very natural. But what is important now for Korea is to bring all these let's say, conversations about democracy and about the country as such from the small circles of parliament and the government into the whole people, because the candlelight rallies have shown that very many people, especially also young people, are concerned and do want to make a contribution to Korea.
And while public interest remains high, he says more efforts are needed in society as a whole, as full democracy is not something that happens overnight, but comes from education and practice. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now for a look at stories making headlines around the world, and we're going to start not so far away. In Japan, lawmakers there have passed a record budget bill with high social and military spending. For more on this and other international news, let's turn to our No Aram. So Aram, give us a rundown of this budget and what we can expect going forward.
Well, Mark, the budget bill totaling a record $926 billion was passed by the upper house of Japan's parliament on Wednesday. The budget is for the new fiscal year, which starts on Sunday and is focused heavily on social security and military spending. As you said, outlays for social security will rise to an all-time high of $311 billion, accounting for a third of the budget plan. The large welfare spending is to respond to Japan's aging population, which has made it difficult for the debt-ridden nation to rein in social security expenditures such as pensions and medical costs. Military spending, meanwhile, has also been earmarked at a record high of $49 billion, rising every year since Abe took office in 2012. He has cited threats from North Korea as a need to strengthen his country's military and has repeatedly called for an amendment to Japan's pacifist constitution. Some of the military budget will be used to acquire US-developed missile defense systems. With the passage of the budget bill, attention is now shifting to debate on a mid-year fiscal reform plan, which will come around June. That will likely be aimed at trying to rein in Japan's debt that currently stands as the highest in the industrialized world, amounting to more than twice the size of Japan's economy. Failure to curb spending has cast doubts on Abe's will to back fiscal reform. He has already pushed back a fiscal 2020 budget balancing goal, opting to raise spending on child welfare and education instead. In other news, Ecuador says WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been barred from using the internet at the Ecuadorian embassy in London for interfering in other countries' affairs. The Ecuadorian government said he violated an agreement with the embassy, where he has been holed up for nearly 6 years, to not comment on international issues online. It added his recent activity on social media put Ecuador's good relations with the UK, EU and other nations at risk. Assange recently expressed strong support for separatist leaders in Spain's Catalonia region and decried the arrest of former Catalan leader Carles Puigdemont. He also was engaged in a heated clash of words with a British minister on Twitter, questioning London's claim that Russia was behind the poisoning of a former Russian spy in Salisbury. Assange sought refuge at the embassy in 2012 to avoid extradition to Sweden on alleged sex crimes, an investigation that has now been closed. He is still wanted, however, in Britain for jumping bail. Saudi Arabia's King Salman is giving some 90,000 Saudi students who are studying abroad a financial boost to help them with their education. On Wednesday, he approved a proposal made by his son and heir, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, to give $2,000 to each student studying on government scholarships. The Saudi government will also expand its overseas scholarship program to include students studying at their own expense in recognized universities.
Good morning. The fine dust levels are high in many northern regions of South Korea, while air quality in Beijing reached dangerous levels Wednesday as extreme smog and a sandstorm hung heavy over China's capital city. So South Korea's northern regions will be dusty for most of the day again. Wear a face mask that seals tightly around your face. Meanwhile, dry weather alerts are in place in many eastern regions, and a wildfire that started on a mountain in Gosong County in Gangwon-do Province early Thursday continues to spread, burning houses and public buildings. Temperatures will be similar to yesterday, most parts seeing highs near or above 20 degrees Celsius, including here in the capital, Gyeongju, Daegu, and Daejeon. With that, let's take a look at the international weather for viewers around the world. So many parts of South Korea will be under partly cloudy skies with highs in the 20s today. Most parts of North Korea will have slightly cooler highs than Wednesday. And as for the rest of Asia, Japan's famous cherry blossoms have reached full bloom in Tokyo, and the bloom in Tokyo is expected to last until the end of this week. Meanwhile, in Perth, sunny weather is ahead for Easter long weekend. Heading to North America, rain will give way to foggy conditions overnight in Washington, D.C., with a very warm high of 25 degrees Celsius. And as for South America, most areas will be under sunny skies except Bogota. Taking you to Europe, it's going to be rainy in London, Berlin, and Paris on Thursday. Lastly, to Africa, those in Egypt can expect a drop in temperatures during the daytime on Thursday. And that's all the weather update for now.
Well, that's all we have for now. Our next bulletin is coming up at noon Korea time, so until then, goodbye.
February 12, 1593. A Japanese army of 30,000 began its invasion of Chosun and attacked Haengju's Hansong fortress. The Chosun army only numbered 2,300 and weapons ran short, so the people living inside the walls of the fortress fought back and the women carried stones in their aprons. It is said that the word apron, which is called Haengju Chima in Korean, came from the name of Haengju in order to honor the services